In this module, I'm going to talk about BPS installation and show you how to install the Business Process Studio. First, of course, you have to download the software, and depending upon which version you are implementing and the time in which you take this course, you may be downloading this from BizFlow's product downloads website, which is found at download.bizflow.com, and you will need access to this site, which you can be granted access by the customer support team at BizFlow if you don't already have access. Or you may have been given a link to directly the download itself. Either way, you're going to find and download the installer for the Process Studio. And on the download site, you can see I can download a zip or an ISO file, so I'm just going to download the zip, and that's what we're going to work with. Of course, once you have the zip file downloaded, you're then going to extract the zip file, so you can't do an installation unless you extract the files. So make sure that you extract all of the files into an appropriate directory. It'll by default create a directory, and so we'll just use that default directory. You can see in terms of disk space needed, you're going to need about 250 megabytes of space. Once all the files are extracted, you can then do the installation. And you can see that there's a setup file, and the other important thing I want to point out is that there is a README. So there's two things that you need to do before you install BPS. First, you have to be an administrator on the machine that you're doing the install onto. If you're not, you're going to run into issues. So first, you need to be an administrator. Secondly, you want to make sure that you have the prerequisite software to install BPS. And this basically shows you the client operating systems that are supported with BizFlow 12. Every version has its own operating systems that it supports, so you need to be sure that you're installing BPS on one of these two operating systems. And installing BPS is pretty straightforward. You simply need to run the setup. And the installer is going to run like any install wizard and simply follow the steps of the wizard. Here it asks you if you want to remove an existing installation, and I happen to be installing this on a machine that already has the Studio installed, which is why it's by default going to remove, but you can repair, modify, or install it new. And then of course it's asking by default what do you want to install, and we're just going to install everything. And again, if you just take all of the defaults, you can just click install, and that's going to install the Studio. Once you install the Studio, you'll find the icon on your desktop to run the Studio, and you simply double click to open and run the application. Now, one of the things about the Studio is that it has automated updates. So the first time that you connect to a server, dependent upon the server that you're connecting to and the version, it may ask if you want to download updates to the Process Studio. When you first open your Process Studio, you're not going to see anything in the BizFlow Explorer because you haven't set up any servers to connect to. But what we'll do in a later module is we're going to actually add a server and connect to that server. And once you do connect to that server, you can define which server is the upgrade server. And by doing that, when you then connect to the server, it knows what version of BizFlow the server is, and therefore it's going to keep the Studio in sync with that server. So the next time you open the Studio, it's going to look to the server that you're connected to as your upgrade server, and it's going to ask you if you want to update any of the files if in fact the Studio needs to be upgraded. Now that we have BPS installed, the next thing we're going to do is create a basic process and save it to the desktop.